Back for a third season with the Fantasy Football Series exclusively here on CBSSports.com, and oh, so much to talk about. But hey, that's why we've got 16 weeks. But we are heading into week 2, out of week 1. A lot of questions were raised about young quarterbacks, whether or not they could lead your fantasy team. Some were answered, some not so much, and one traded. And for more on that, we bring in senior fantasy football writer Jamey Eisenberg from Miami. Jamey, you'll be traveling up here to New York next week, so we'll get to sit next to each other a little bit. But as for Charlie Frye, he's traveling out to Seattle, traded to the Seahawks. What does it mean for the rest of the Browns? None of them were hot this past week anyway, but does that mean anything good for them in the near future?
Well, I think you stay away from the Browns, maybe outside of Jamal Lewis. Braylon Edwards should be okay. Kellen Winslow will be what he was a week ago with Derek Anderson or Brady Quinn, eventually whoever becomes a starter. But I think, the Browns, to quote Dennis Green from a year ago, the Browns are who we thought they were. It's a bad team, a struggling team, young. Future-wise, they may be okay, but right now I think you stay away from most of the Browns outside of maybe Jamal Lewis for a week or two throughout the year.
And Kellen Winslow as well. We'll see how that goes, too. All right, we'll get to the biggest names in fantasy. They're not on the Cleveland Browns. We'll get to some of those in a little bit and whether or not people should be worried as far as what they'll do week in, week out. But I want to start with some of the questions that were raised heading into the season, dealt with quarterbacks. Let's talk about Tony Romo and Jay Cutler. They both have good ground attacks, both have a go-to receiver, both had good week 1 situation. Which one, though, do you think will be more consistent in his first full season as a starter?
Well, I think from a fantasy perspective, Tony Romo is the guy you want to look toward because of Terrell Owens, because of Jason Witten. And, the running game, good for both guys, but I think, with a horse like Travis Henry and the way that Mike Shanahan likes to use the running game, I think Julius Jones and Marion Barber will not be as effective as the Denver running game. So I think you'll see Romo just be a little bit more pass-happy. Some of the secondaries that they'll face, obviously they're going to face the Giants again 1 more week, so that should be a big game. And this week going against the Miami secondary, which is banged up. I think for this week, definitely Romo is the way to go, and as the season goes on, Romo is the guy you want to use.
Yeah, Jeremiah Bell out for the season down there in Miami, so you're right, they are banged up. All right, let's stick with the young quarterback theme here in the Monday Nighter. Most fantasy folk thought that it would produce big numbers for the quarterbacks, but let's be honest, it just smacked people right across the face. Matt Leinart, Alex Smith, neither one of them had a good game in their performance. But I want to focus here on Leinart, Jamey, because you saw what Ken Wisenhunt wants to do. We knew he wanted to run the football. That's exactly what they did. If you have Larry Fitzgerald or Anquan Boldin as your number 1 receiver, are you concerned?
I don't think you should be because, as we saw last year, there were a couple of games where Edgerrin James had 25, 30 carries. You have to really establish the run with a young quarterback to sort of open up that passing game, and I think that's what Wisenhunt is trying to do. He has to sort of also, from a football perspective, establish a mentality of, we're going to be tough, we're going to push, we're going to have a good offensive line, and establish that sort of tough mentality. So I think you're going to see that in the early parts of games where Edgerrin James will be more of a focal point. But I think if you still have Bolden, he still will be involved. He scored a touchdown Monday night. You still have Larry Fitzgerald. He will obviously be a part of the offense. And I think Matt Leinart, he's still going to be a quality fantasy quarterback. The thing that concerned me a little bit is, you see those receivers and they're just running downfield play after play after play. They have to get some more short routes going, involve the tight end, involve Edgerrin James out of the backfield. But I think, talking about the 2 wide receivers, really don't worry about them yet because long season and they both will be very good as the year goes on.
Yeah, I think people are a little bit more concerned because they went up against the 49ers defense, which was supposed to be not that much better from 06, but certainly looked very good here to start 07. All right, those were cold receivers, Jamey. Let's get into hot receivers, and that being Plaxico Burress, Lavernius Coles, Torrey Holt, guys that some people predicted not to have great week 1s. They're coming off injuries, but, they all had big games. I want to get into Plaxico Burress here, though. By now, people know Eli Manning, he's got the shoulder injury. The Giants denying that it's a separated shoulder, but the reports out of New York saying he could miss as much as a month. What does this do for Plaxico Burress and Amani Toomer, for that matter?
Well, I think if we look by the end of the year and you see Plaxico has 3 touchdowns, you may not be surprised because it could be ugly in New York with the injury to Brandon Jacobs. Now their starting running back is out. Plaxico Burress being banged up. Amani Toomer still not 100%. I think Burress should be okay because he is a quality wide receiver, and you saw what he's able to do against the Cowboys. But obviously you have to lower your expectations a little bit if Darren Lorenzen is the starting quarterback. I think Plaxico will still be thrown out a lot, and again, because of his size, his speed, jump balls in the red zone, deep passes where you can could just sort of hang it up there and see him go get it. But maybe now he goes from a borderline number 2 to sort of a 2 or 3 in terms of fantasy options. I don't think you'll expect those kind of games that he had against the Cowboys week in, week out. But he may be able to get you a touchdown, 70, 80 yards. Still should be somebody that on a week-to-week basis you could look to put in your starting lineup.
All right, Jimmy, one last thing to get to here, and that is the top 3 picks in most people's fantasy drafts, that being Steven Jackson, LaDainian Tomlinson, and Larry Johnson, usually, obviously, with LaDainian Tomlinson going first. Week 1, other than LT, nobody got in the end zone. He was held rushing yards to just 25, but I want to focus on Steven Jackson because he talked about breaking the all-purpose yardage record in the NFL, but now he's got no Orlando Pace for the season, no Todd Stussy, and Richie Incognito is out again in Week 2. Are you concerned for people who have Steven Jackson?
I'm really not, because last year Orlando Pace was out, missed the final 7 games of the season, and Steven Jackson went on a tear. I think you'll see his rushing yards may suffer a little bit, but he's going to be involved more in the passing game because they're going to do some quicker routes, get the ball out, get the ball to Jackson, in the flat, coming out of the backfield. So I think Steven Jackson will still be fine. The fumbles were a concern in Week 1 against Carolina, but Carolina also was the last team to hold him to under 100 yards a year ago in the 15-0 loss. So I think Carolina just has his number. So if you're looking at Steven Jackson, you still start him week in, week out, unless there's a bad trend that develops with the whole offensive line shift. But losing Pace is the biggest loss, and I think you'll see he'll still be able to recover a little bit. Mark Bolger, different story, but Steven Jackson should be okay.
Yeah, we'll have to see if Steven Jackson continues to run to the right now that the left side no longer has Orlando Pace. All right, Jamie, we'll see you up here next to me on my right next week, but for now, we'll talk to you soon.
Looking forward to it, Jason.
All right, folks, that'll do it for the first week of the fantasy series here on CBSSports.com. But for more as far as move makers and who to start and who to sit, be sure to stay right here and navigate on this website. We'll see you soon. Take care.